Hello, everyone, and welcome to the webcast. My name is Christine Dorsey Davis. I'm the Executive Director of the Ohio Chapter of the American Planning Association, and I am your webcast moderator. Today is Friday, July 24th, and we will hear the presentation, Urban Planning in a COVID-19 World. For technical help during today's webcast, you can type your questions in the chat box found in your webcast toolbar. For your content questions related to the presentation, you can, again, just type those in your chat box located in your webcast toolbar, and we will answer those at the end of the presentation during the Q&A. If your question is for a particular panelist, just say so in your question. If not, it'll just end up being an open-ended question to all of our panelists. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our sponsoring chapters and divisions for 2020. Thanks to all of those participating APA chapters and divisions for making these webcasts possible, and most importantly, free to members. Today, in particular, we are sponsored by two chapters of APA, the National Capital Area and the California chapter. So thanks to both of you for joining us today on this super timely topic. Coming up next on your screen is a list of our upcoming webcasts through almost the end of August. We're actually booked every Friday through the end of this year. So we're starting to take on some Wednesdays and Thursdays just due to the popularity of needing virtual professional development. Before you on your screen is actually a screenshot of our webcast webpage, ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast. So on the first tab, that's where you can register for our upcoming webcasts. The second tab is our prior webcasts. And there is where we post all of PDF copies of all of our sessions. The distance education tab, we do have a few sessions available for distance education, so on-demand viewing in ethics and law. So you can check those out too if you need to fulfill those requirements for AICP. Today's session has been approved for 1.5 CM credits for live viewing. You can log your credits by heading over to planning.org, logging into your MyAPA account, and then you can either search by today's title or the event number, which is found there on your screen. And if you forget both of them, you can simply head over to our webcast webpage at ohioplanning.org/planningwebcast, and you'll get all the information you need. Like us on Facebook, Planning Webcast Series, to receive up-to-date information on our sessions. We'll post when we have new sessions. We'll post if there's a date change or a time change. So be sure to like us on Facebook. And also subscribe to our YouTube channel. We record all of our sessions and post them up on YouTube. And just search Planning Webcast on YouTube. We'll pop up along with our over 300 videos and over 3,000 subscribers. So be sure to join us. That is the end of my housekeeping. So I am going to turn it over to Mark Lewis DeGrace, who will kick us off today. Mark, those controls are headed over to you.
Okay. Thank you, Christine. So my name is Mark Lewis DeGrace. I'm the Professional Development Officer elect of the National Capital Area Chapter, which encompasses Washington, D.C., Montgomery, and Prince George's County in Maryland. And I'd also like to take an opportunity to thank the California chapter for their co-sponsorship. As it turns out, our three speakers are all from California. That wasn't the intention, but it worked out that way. So thank you all for getting up super early this morning. And the idea for this webinar was looking at how COVID-19 is affecting our planning profession and our cities. So we have three experts in various areas of planning, and I'll let them introduce themselves and briefly discuss how COVID is affecting their communities. And we don't want to just talk for the next hour and a half. We definitely want to hear what all of our viewers are saying and thinking and wondering. So feel free to submit questions and we'll get to them as soon as we can. So with that said, I'll hand it over to Kadarius Colbert. If you'd like to introduce yourself and tell us how things are going on in your community with COVID now.
So good morning, everyone, and good afternoon to the viewers on the East Coast. I hope you all are safe and healthy. So as Mark said, my name is Kadarius Colbert. I am a senior facilities planner with the Santa Ana Unified School District here in Orange County. I have worked in the education and program design space for about 3 years. And prior to this role, I worked as a consultant for a program management firm and served as an assistant planner for a local municipality in East Texas. I currently reside in Costa Mesa, California, where I serve as a planning commissioner as well. I completed my undergrad in Houston, Texas at Texas Southern University in public policy. Received my master's from Cornell University, and I'm excited about today's topic. Right now, I welcome you to my living room where I am. Unfortunately, Costa Mesa, or fortunately, we are still on a lockdown here under the Governor Newsom's order. I imagine Gabriella and Sahar are also under that leadership, share my concerns. Our numbers are steadily decreasing in a way, but I think I will be here for the foreseeable semester, I guess, as I'll say it. So thank you, and I look forward to this discussion.
And then I'll hand it over to Gabriella.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon. I am Gabriela Juarez. I am also the chair of the Transportation Planning Division for APA. And so I'm really excited to be part of this panel and thank Washington for reaching out. I am currently a city planner for the Department of City Planning for the city of Los Angeles. I live in Los Angeles near Griffith Park, so at least I'm able to get that kind of amenity of open space in COVID times. I've worked for the city for 15 years now, and primarily I've been kind of a go-between in terms of long-range planning and physical planning within the department, and it's really interesting to be able to be that bridge between policy and project planning. And in terms of our numbers are steadily increasing, not good. We were doing great, and then we just couldn't. This is why we can't have nice things. So, so we're here in my living room, well, dining room actually. But so welcome. Please pull up a chair. And it's frightening because people have not been able to really wrap their brain around the severity of this situation, and it makes it hard to do our jobs, which is why I really appreciate this panel.
And Sahar?
Thanks. Hi, yeah, I'm Sahar Shirazi. I'm on the other side of California, up in what we call Northern California, but really, technically, it's in the middle. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. And I professionally, I work for a consulting firm doing transportation planning and policy, but I've always been at the intersection of equity, environment, and planning. And so working a little bit on land use, a little bit on transportation, a little bit on community development. Previous to this, I worked for the former governor of California in the Office of Planning and Research. And Gabriella, I might need to apologize to you because I led the rewriting of the general plan guidelines for the state, which create a whole lot of new requirements or suggestions. And formerly, previous to that, I worked at the US DOT with Mark, actually. So I've been engaged in this world for quite a while, but I think I came to it from an equity focus and ended up in transportation and land use without the intention of ending up in transportation or land use, but recognizing that all the things that I care about in terms of community and environment and equity and health and economy sort of meet in this space. So I'm very excited about this conversation. I think as detrimental as what's happening now is, it also presents an opportunity for refocusing. I actually live in Oakland, California, and I serve on the Planning Commission here, and I think we'll talk a little bit about it, but Oakland is really kind of trying a lot of new things to really center racial equity in particular into our planning process. Some of it's working, some of it's not. We have a lot of disparity, and similar to you, Gabriella, things are getting worse here. I am not in my living room. I'm actually up at my parents' house in Sonoma County in their living room. Thus, you will note the artwork maybe is not reflective of someone my age, but I'm excited for this conversation. So thank you for having me.
Thank you all. And Kadarius, let's start off with you. can you share with us briefly what the Santa Ana Unified School District is doing right now? And are you planning for school starting as normal in August?
So the quick answer to your second question is no, under the governor's guidance. The first question is prior to answer your first question, prior to July the 14th, we had a very robust, comprehensive plan in place as to how we would reopen our schools under a hybrid schedule. For our elementary students, we were going to bring them in two groups, a group A and group B, Monday, Tuesday group, and a Thursday, Friday group, and Wednesdays will be professional development for our teachers. However, as things happen, every day is a new day in changing in this space. We will begin the first day of school on August 10th remote, and for the foreseeable future, up until January, and we have a better understanding of this virus and how it impacts our teachers, students, and our families, we will not be returning into our physical learning environment. And so that's currently the schedule. However, there are some districts, school districts adjacent to us, who do not share those visions. And some have decided to attempt to proceed under the guidance of the Orange County Department of Education, which made national news recently because they decided to vote that they would allow students to go in with no social distance and our mask requirements. And so our district has decided that we will begin through distance education for the foreseeable future. And so looking forward to the next tomorrow. That's all I can say.
Thanks a lot. So Gabriella, I'll go to you next. So from initially back in March, when we first started having shutdown orders, we saw vehicle traffic and transit ridership fall off the cliff. We're not quite at pre-pandemic levels, but we've definitely seen an increase in Washington, D.C. of vehicle traffic and transit riderships. With I don't even think this is technically the second wave, but what do you foresee as transit ridership and vehicle traffic over probably the next 3 to 6 months, kind of looking in your crystal ball?
Yes, well, it's such a good crystal ball that I can tell you, I'm the envy of all. It's going to be really difficult to understand where we're going. You know, we thought we would have a better handle on behavior, but clearly California, Florida, Texas, we failed in that effort, and so it's really unclear what the patterns will be. I think the school part of this is really important to the dialogue, because children being able to go somewhere for schooling is a critical part of our structure of our community and how we work, because it allows parents to then focus on their work and being able to go to an office or a work location if that's possible. If the children are at home, that's not an option from just about anyone. So there's a lot of moving parts to that. So it makes it very hard to understand where we're going to go. The likelihood of us being able to really capture the foreseeable future is really dependent on how our numbers go. I think the bigger shifts are felt in urban environments, because the location spacing is smaller, so people can walk or have shorter commutes, and so that does help in terms of having a little bit of a bump in transit ridership. But then also there's the essential workers that are hugely part of our transit ridership and have not had an option. But I think, you know, we maintain with bumps and dips here and there. I think that until we can really secure safety, public safety, with a vaccine option that's viable, it's going to be kind of hazy at best.
Can I jump in on that one a little bit?
Oh, of course.
Already. I've been doing a little bit of work around the country and actually a little bit globally with our Australian team as well on this exact issue, because it is a real concern, especially in urban areas, as we're seeing places around the world go back not only to pre-COVID levels, but even beyond as people get back in their cars, and thus exacerbate the negative impacts, especially on specific communities that are often most impacted by greenhouse gas emissions and air pollution and congestion. So I think that there's a lot of different ideas for how to make transit safer. We've done a bunch of work on how to create social distancing and safety and cleanliness. There's also some sort of innovative programs happening with things like microtransit, things like electric bikes, where they make sense. But I think that the real key is going to be creating either incentives or requirements to shift behavior. Because I think, to your point, we can't predict human behavior, and if anything, people are probably a little more resistant than they've been previously. And so, whatever the reasoning may be, whether it's because of equity or because of environmental outcomes or delay for congestion, I think that there's a lot of places that are trying to prevent that sort of Carmageddon idea that might be coming. So just interesting to think about how to prevent it as we move forward.
Thank you both. So Sahar, while you're in the groove, as a member of Oakland's Planning Commission, can you, and I know we've all seen across the country, we've all gone to Zoom meetings, we've gone to Zoom public meetings. What specifically has the city of Oakland done? And I guess this is a two-part question. What have you done? What's worked? What hasn't worked? Let's just start with that.
Sure. So for the Planning Commission, we are fairly dependent on the Planning Department because we're appointed and confirmed board, but we're not, technically working for anyone. We don't get paid or anything like that, except in good feelings. And so when COVID hit, and I think you guys know that the Bay Area shut down a bit before the rest of the country. And so our planning department actually just completely shut down. And in response, Oakland actually shut everything down. So, no parking tickets, everything was just closed, which meant a huge delay in planning commission, not only meetings, but people that were in the midst of planning projects. So all of our CPUs, CUPs, all of our, permits, everything was delayed. It was a bit challenging at first, but I think that people were very understanding. I definitely got a lot of emails that were like, we were supposed to be at this meeting, our project is blocked, what's going on? But the planning department really pulled it together, did an amazing amount of work, and switched everything to online. And so we were only out for about a month and a half. And they were able to get us back onto Zoom meetings, clarify the process. So they used to bring us physical packets. Obviously that's not happening anymore, so everything's moved online. And then I think one of the key pieces for Oakland in particular, because we do have quite a strong digital divide, is that that there was a push to make sure that even though everything was online, it was accessible to folks. And so we've done a bit of, and not me personally, but the city has done a bit of work with partner organizations to try and get more access to equipment, laptops and such, as well as opening up places where people can use internet equipment around the city so that they have a little more access to it. But otherwise it's, Zoom meetings, everything online, a lot of this like raising your hand, separating the panels, explaining at the beginning of every meeting how it's going to run. So we've adjusted, but I will say the first online meeting we had after we reopened, we had 45 people lined up to speak on the first topic virtually. So very engaged still.
That's good to know. And so Kadarius, you briefly touched on this earlier, I'm interested to know how you've been kind of learning best lessons from kind of at the beginning of the pandemic, but also through this summer, how you've been learning best lessons from other jurisdictions in the state of California and possibly across the country. And also second to that, how have you been able to coordinate with Orange County and also with the state of California about their guidance?
So what we immediately learned was every district is different, and that the way in which communities and school districts will have to address this will be very specific to their community, their family groups, and their the demographics that they serve. Santa Ana as a city is a very unique high density population, majority minority Hispanic population. And for our school district, we're the 10th largest school district with approximately 48,000 students across 52 schools, and one of the second largest in the county. And so the decisions that we make impact a lot of our families. And so how we were able to coordinate initially, as the largest employer in the city, when we shut down and other people began layoffs, that began to impact our families, our students, and where they were coming from. So a lot of people didn't have food. So the first way we coordinated with our local cities we had 13 distribution sites that opened up, and we served over 1 million meals by I think May 15th, because we distributed 3 times a week, and we had food for the entire week for our families, because access to food, the students that really depend on how their health depends on like their access to food. And a lot of our families, they're multi-generational, so we have students that come from households where it's grandparent, parent, and them living in high densities, and so we worked with those communities, primarily our state legislators, to ensure that we could feed, because there was a law restricting access for food to other populations outside of the district. And we knew that some of our charter school students that lived within our district did not have access due to, for whatever reason, their school district was not open, or a lot of those operators live outside of the county or outside of the city. And so that left them without. And so we had to work with state legislators and leaders to ensure that we could feed them legally. So we passed ordinances for that. We also allowed our sites to serve as testing centers in some spaces, because we have these large facilities. We worked with our city staff to ensure that, for traffic patterns, because we were a food distribution site, so we had to work with our local police department, although Santa Ana Unified has their own police department as well, to coordinate traffic, to manage lines. And at the beginning of this, no one understood how this worked. We have a warehouse and a printing center, so we used our marquee signs to communicate information for the city, because we have so many sites across campuses. So it was a large coordinated effort, and I think it was that, I've always pushed the connection between schools and communities, and it was, I think, at that juncture that we realized how much we need to work together more, and how we're stronger together when it comes to serving our students and those families. So I hope that answered your question.
Oh, very much so. The thing I'm noticing, kind of just hearing you guys, is kind of as planners, we, at our best, we're jack of all trades, master of none. So that ability to reach out to the police, to the elected leaders, I think that's something that we always bring to the table. And I think this is a great opportunity for all of us to really engage in our communities. Mm-hmm. With that, Sahar, I wanted to bounce over to you. As you mentioned, Oakland has a large Black and Latinx community, and as we've seen in most major areas, the COVID-19's definitely had a large impact on Black and Latino and communities of color. Can you just speak to that, kind of what you see on a regular basis and what impact you've seen through the Planning Commission?
Sure. So slightly separate but related. I think just as someone who lives in and basically loves and breathes Oakland all day long, I'm deeply invested in this community, and it's similar to everywhere in the country. I think COVID has just highlighted the existing disparities between communities, and especially in the health impacts that result from social factors and investments and infrastructure, and all the things that we know are somewhat problematic. Here we have a racial equity office an office of race and I can't even remember, race and equity. That's what it is, in the city itself. And at the beginning of COVID, when we realized that the racial disparity was so strong, the city started a task force as well. So we've documented really well what's going on, and tried to respond a bit. So at this point, the last thing I read was that almost half of our cases are in the Latinx community, and they're rising, which is terrifying, and then obviously disproportionately affecting the Black community as well. So part of the response has been to make sure that the testing centers are located in those communities, make sure that there's outreach and engagement and education in those communities as much as is possible. We actually have quite a few free testing centers currently in Oakland. Some are supported by, we have one of our base buildings and businesses is Kaiser. Northern California is headquartered here. So we have some that are supported by healthcare, but others that are just supported by community organizations like Community Roots, that again are really focused on testing specific areas and responding to the demographics. As far as the Planning Commission has gone, I think that what's happened is that it has highlighted, again, this is not a new problem. This is not a new disparity. This is not something that just came out of nowhere. We have historically practiced, planning and implementation measures that disparately affect certain communities. And whether it's intentional or not, that is, oh my gosh, I'm sorry. that is how we've planned and created our cities. And Oakland is a really good example of that. I think that, back when I worked at the national level, we talked a lot about the 980 freeway here, and how it's a prime example of a freeway that bifurcated a community, and a largely Black community, and bulldozed a largely Black community, and destroyed a largely Black community. And so this is not new, but I think the way that it's affected projects and the Planning Commission in particular is that it's brought a lot more people out. So as I mentioned, one of our first meeting, one of the first projects that we were discussing was what was originally conceived as a live workspace in West Oakland, which is where the 980 freeway is located. That project got a lot of pushback from the community because they were worried about people living there in what is traditionally an industrial area. They were worried about gentrification. There's just a lot of, also anyone who's done planning in California knows everything has some pushback. And over the course of their conversations and outreach and engagement, and with the change in everything that happened with COVID, 45 people came to speak in favor of the project. The project was changed to a work-live type project rather than a live-work, if that distinction makes sense. And I think we're probably going to see a lot more of that in the future as people move to working online if they can. And the support came almost, I think I would say like 80% of the support was from BIPOC communities. We had Elaine Brown, who was the former, only female head of the Black Panther Party, came and spoke about this project. And so I think that there's just this push, this understanding that we have planned for middle-class white communities. We have created best practices that are centered on whiteness. And so in this moment, there's a change happening in the conversation, and it's bringing more people out to talk about these different projects and to be really open and honest about these projects. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, I actually cried at that meeting. It was just so beautiful to see people being really authentic about what's going on. And I don't think we've done that enough in the past. So it's nice to see it starting.
Thank you. Gabriella, I want to swing back to you. So one thing, as you said earlier, there are still so many unknowns from the transportation realm, and I completely understand that. So I wanted to, and kind of touching on what Sahar said, where we have populations that tend to be more white collar, that can telework, that can work remotely on a beach somewhere if they have the resources to do that. I wanted to ask you, with the increase in teleworking, do you think it'll have a lasting impact? And specifically, I'm thinking about regional carbon emissions and the ability of MPOs to make their air quality targets. Do you think that's something that will actually continue, or in 3 to 5 years we'll be back to exactly what we were about a year ago?
Yeah, I think it really kind of is led by what Sahar mentioned, is that if we make the changes in the regulations, then they have to follow them. You know, our travel behavior is what dictates the majority of our forecasting. And when we have a great economy, our traffic volumes are off the charts because everyone's going to work. And so we more than likely, it's going to bounce back to the levels that we had before in urban environments for sure, just because the demands of the economy support that quite a bit. So it's up to us to really take advantage of the moment that we have to be able to make those institutional changes in not just incentivizing, but really forcing people to change their travel behavior. And so, you know, when you make it impossible to drive somewhere, then you have to take the next best alternative. And so, you know, I think that the economy is going to be, you know, devastated for many years to come. And so I think we'll have some progress in that. Teleworking will be a better option because people's leases will be up and they won't be able to renew leases. And so they'll really be forced into investing in teleworking. I'm somehow wanting to telemarket today. And so that part, you know, it will be controlled to some degree by the economy, but, you know, if we really want to see the change, we need to make the institutional changes into how people travel. And so making live work options, jobs, housing balances, truly a priority for us in how we develop our vision for our cities and our densities, thinking, you know, about how we can encourage people not to crowd in our urban spaces. You know, physical planning is really key to how we do our planning for our developments as we move forward. And so these are the things that we have control over, that we can, you know, make it seem like it's a choice for people, but really we're the masterminds creating all these decisions, right?
Thank you. So Kadarius, I wanted to ask you, and I know a lot of what we've been talking about in the planning profession across education is the achievement gap between mainly white populations and BIPOC populations. And I was wondering, and I fully appreciate that you guys aren't thinking much beyond January at this point, but have you or has the school district thought about year-round classes as a way to kind of deal with that achievement gap, or has that been something you've talked about in the past, or is even on your radars?
That is, and so as a person that's on the facilities team, I've learned a lot about our ed services side in the past few months. And so, no, we are not considering a summer year-round thing. California has very active teachers union, and they have a very set schedule. But what we have done as a district is what the California Department of Education instituted was a continuity of learning plan, and the district has to submit that to the state board to ensure that we're managing and measuring our metrics for student success, because the summer slide for Black and Brown populations is real. And so what we're calling the COVID-19, which kind of further compounds with that, is a major concern for our students who we have a 47% population that they're English language learners. Our two languages that are spoken outside of English are Vietnamese and Spanish in our district. So when COVID occurred and we shut down our school district, a lot of our students, we realized, had large equity gaps in internet access. And so there was an infrastructure with how do we get Chromebooks or iPads or any type of thing to our students, and who can teach them, if there's this language barrier for these students that are able to learn. So for foster youth, students who are in foster care, English language learners, our students with disabilities, who require that classroom support from, when they are in school, and our homeless population that we have, which is about 6,000 students, which is a lot, or students who just experience housing insecurity and don't report it. These are our major concerns, which will further contribute to widening the achievement gap for our district. So we have these metrics in place to ensure. So we have been sending our teachers in some respects to our communities to go out and to talk and to figure out, why can't we get in contact with students? Why aren't parents answering the phone? Why aren't, just all of these things. But when you have students who come from households where there are 14 people living in a 2-bedroom house, the last thing they're focused on is learning, or where they're going to have the space to learn, or the capacity to learn. And so those are some of the issues and challenges that we're dealing with. We're trying to put education at the forefront of students' minds who are just trying to eat and survive in the middle of a pandemic when their families don't have jobs.
And if I could, and you brought up something interesting, that very much in education, you're definitely not just dealing with educating children. You're dealing with, like you said, homelessness. You're dealing with disabilities. Can you briefly kind of expand on how you guys are trying to address those larger societal issues that Sahar and Gabriella already touched on, but kind of, because every child has to go to school at some point. So can you kind of just touch on how you guys are trying to kind of take care of these things, social workers going to houses, which they probably can't anymore, and how you're trying to achieve that, make the situation a little better?
We are trying to remedy every inequity that is systemic and has been in this country for hundreds of years in the matter of months. And so the connection gap, what we did were we identified where our major students were they just didn't have strong internet access. We deployed mobile units with routers in some communities and had them sit there. We had hotspots when worked with Verizon and Sprint and other carriers to ensure that we had coverage in our areas. I've learned a lot about coverage maps and and other regulations around antennas here recently. We also, our professional development, started working with our parents. We have a wellness center in all of our communities, and right now our parents aren't able to get that training that they need to support our students. So we have worked with to train to create our parents to get them more tech savvy. Everyone had to learn Zoom and Google Hangout and Teams in the matter of months. Nobody knew these platforms existed before, largely, and so we're teaching them this, and also having to ensure that we're working across language barriers. And in some cases where you do have to have social workers or students with disabilities, one of the major legal challenges that we were facing, and districts across the country may be facing, is that litigation for special education and how we service those students who don't have equal access to learning. So one of the things that we have been doing is working with our state legislators to ensure that those laws are somehow suspended to prevent and protect our teachers and our school districts just across this county from facing those challenges when we can't get into those homes to teach or train or support those students in the same way that we're doing for other students in those families. So we're trying, but I think every day is a new day as to how we figure out how to remedy these supports and what learning will look like, what our learning environments will look like for the foreseeable future. So you'll hear me say that often. I don't know what tomorrow holds.
And I think that's a sign of a good planner, where we have enough confidence to talk to what we don't know. Sahar, as we talked about earlier, the San Francisco Bay Area, San Francisco specifically, but the entire Bay Area, including Oakland, has kind of been the poster child of gentrification of over the last now probably close to 10 years. Can you kind of just talk to how COVID's been impacting the Bay Area's economy as a whole? And I'm also thinking specifically about TOD housing, TOD developments. I remember at the APA conference in San Francisco, we took a tour of Fruitvale Station, just look at the development that was going on in the future development. Can you just talk about the Bay Area's economy as a whole, and if things are getting better or worse, as it were?
Sure. I mean, I think that in one sense, things are getting worse everywhere, right? We have something like 35 million people unemployed. Last I looked, it's probably higher now. And we, the Bay Area has a pretty big tech-based economy in some ways, but also a really big service-based economy. Oakland in particular has been a working class town for a very, very long time. So we have a lot of job loss. And there's been a lot of attempts to help, especially independent artists and gig workers and all the restaurants that are shutting down. But it's never going to be enough without federal help. I mean, that's just the reality of where we are in this pandemic. My personal opinion is just that I think we're gonna have a shift in the tech economy. I don't think it's going away, but I think a lot of the sort of unicorn companies that are venture capital funded and big ideas that may not have worked are probably going to go away, at least temporarily. And just, as a Bay Area person, I think a lot of us are okay with that. But that being said, we don't want anyone to lose their livelihood. We don't want anyone to lose their jobs. We don't want anyone to be suffering. And we're definitely seeing a lot of that. I think that the shifts that we see happening are in those two worlds. So one is that with the move to working from home, places like Twitter have already announced that they are just moving to work from home permanently forever. Real estate is very expensive here. And so as people realize that they don't actually need these office spaces, they're realizing they can save a lot of money. The company I work for had 3 different office spaces, 2 in San Francisco, 1 in Oakland. And so they've been closed obviously this entire time, and they're thinking, wait, do we actually need to have 3 offices? Can we save some of that money and put it into people's benefit accounts, etc.? So I think there's a lot of that kind of negotiating going on, which will probably flow down to planning commission projects soon, in terms of maybe less offices, and which has its own set of problems, because a lease on an office is a lot more beneficial than a residential lease for a developer. But anyway, so I think that's one part of it, and we're going to see some shift in that economy locally. I think that maybe those companies might still be based here, but people can kind of live wherever they want if they're not going into an office every day. And a lot of people move to San Francisco because of the tech, not because they're in love with San Francisco necessarily. So I think that's one shift. The other one is just the service economy. I mean, our bar and restaurant scene is huge. Our events industry is huge, and that is all shut down right now. And every attempt to sort of help is going to fall a little bit short. So I think there's a lot of work being done to try and figure out what to do about that. And how to capture. So we have, for example, we have projects still coming to us at the Planning Commission that are going to be new retail, new bars, new restaurants. It seems a little crazy right now because we're probably going to lose about half of our bars and restaurants. But the reality is that there's a there's going to be a crazy latent demand as well. I think all of us, probably everyone that's listening on this call, the minute that we know we're 100% safe or 80% safe, are going to go out and like eat out and go to bars and spend all our money, right? That's what makes a community thrive, and we all miss it. So there is sort of this potential for a really fast rebound, but it's going to depend on who is still around. And I think the people that are going through the process now might actually really benefit from that, depending on the timeline. So anyway, there's a lot going on there. Oakland had invested in creating a artist community, a maker community. We actually have different areas in the city that are dedicated to that. We have a Black business district. There's been a lot of issues in terms of the planning and the back and forth around them, but these were initiatives and programs and attempts to rise the economy prior to COVID. And so we're still just sort of going through the understanding of how we can push those things forward and maybe change them a bit as we need to make sure we get the most benefit out of them.
Thanks. There's a lot to unpack there. Gabriella, I wanted to switch to you, kind of continuing with the transportation narrative that we've been talking about. And I think this is kind of, actually, I'll ask the first question first. So being with the city of Los Angeles for several years now, having survived the Great Recession, we're seeing, as we mentioned earlier, noticeable declines in transit ridership and a decline in driving, which obviously are going to impact municipal budgets and transit agency budgets. Have you guys already started figuring out how you're going to address less gasoline tax money coming in, less money coming in for LA Metro, and how that's going to affect, I'm thinking, the overall organizations, but also going back to what we were talking about in San Francisco Bay Area, if you're going to see development around the new transit nodes, if we're going to see those take longer to flourish, or what are you guys thinking at this point?
So we were very fortunate in the budget cycle that we got for this coming fiscal year from the state, in terms of getting a ton of money for the projects for high-speed rail, for all of the improvements that we had been wanting for a long time. So we are lucky in that regard that California's transportation in Los Angeles, Southern California, has been the recipient of basically everything that we've been asking for. And these are major transportation improvements, so they're long-term investments. But from a financial standpoint, our LA Metro, I think, is in severe concern of our budget, especially because the ridership is such a big part of it. I don't think that we have really come up with a true game plan as to how to manage the gap and the deficient income that we are experiencing and will probably experience for a while. But there are definitely other agencies that are trying to figure out the best way to navigate some of these dips by creating a better, safer feeling experience for the riders. And so, these are the kinds of institutional changes that we can make in this moment of change, where we develop tools that make people not just be safer, but feel mentally safer in taking transit. Chicago Transit Authority, they've just put out this website, I want to say maybe a month ago, where you can see the densities of people on the different both buses and rail, so that you can predict a little bit more how much crowding will happen on your route. So that's like a really creative idea that we should be embracing. In terms of the TODs, I think that, we, in our planning department, we passed, well, not us, but we were given a measure where we need to be much more inclusive with affordable housing requirements. Our state density bonus program wasn't cutting it. You know, when people are only required to do 11%, you're only going to do 11%. So the new initiative that we have at the more local level requires, it's called the transportation TOCs. I'm blanking on what the O means, but transit-oriented communities. Hello, and the genius behind it was really about the transit lines and the frequency of our headways. Oh, and then COVID happened, so that kind of put a crimp in that plan. In that there was no bus service, so that's a problem. But you know, we have to shift our metrics in terms of defining where our TODs are in a more walkable metric that isn't based on headways, but rather access points and our common travel behavior. Again, it's how we behave. And so I think too, it gives us the opportunity to pull in all of the different aspects of planning, being that you're looking at open space differently, you're looking at site design differently, and just access ways that make more sense in a way that it really does benefit the community. It really does make a more inviting, livable community, and it doesn't maximize the developer dollar. Not that we're demonizing developers, but they tend to not be providing amenities over cost benefits for them. And so I think that the benefit that we will end up in a better place. It's going to be a struggle for us to get there for sure, but these are the moments that we can really change our requirements to be much more equitable and take advantage of the moment that we're given to pause.
And I think that's a good point of how are we as professionals and those of us that work for the municipal side, on the public side, how do we use this opportunity, this time, to kind of make sure our communities are stronger, more resilient going forward? And to that, I wanted to swing over to you, Kadarius, the question of, since Santa Ana is pretty much already a fairly built out environment, are you guys looking at building any new schools? Did you have any new schools under construction or in the planning stages? And has COVID affected those designs? And if so, how?
So that's a big question. So in 2018, our school district passed one of the largest bonds in district history for $232 million. And so, as I stated earlier, we're the second largest district in the county with about 48,000 students. And so, yes, we were in the middle of modernizing, replacing, and rebuilding a number of our school facilities across the district, and updating those facilities. Right now, in the midst of COVID, when COVID happened, we have these tight construction timelines, and we were curious to figure out, like, okay, well, can we continue? Then the governor, like 2 days later, said yes, construction communities can continue. So then we had to work with our construction teams to say, you know, how do we give the guidance? Nobody knows how this works. It doesn't stop just because you have a construction schedule or a tight budget or escalation is, you know, in front of you. So we are moving forward with most of our projects with not significant redesigns to any of them. There is a slight nuance that we are considering what classrooms and what and programs will look like and how they will function in a post-COVID society. So that's something that right now is at the forefront of our mind. But prior to this, school districts across the country, specifically in California, were experiencing enrollment decline. So we are preparing, unless there's a COVID baby boom, to take our school district populations and prepare our facilities for that reduced population. By 2028, we're projected to be at about 35,000 students. And so if that tide doesn't turn, we can't have empty facilities and also operate and manage those. So school districts are in a very unique conundrum of how do we prepare for those facilities either to be reused and serve the community in a different way, or how do we begin to start thinking about what our strategies for managing them will be. And so I think to Sahara's point earlier, she mentioned something about their planning commission, taking on or thinking about the reduction of businesses using business spaces. So I'm thinking about reuse and how in California we're facing a housing crisis. And so school districts take up large swaths of lands in urban areas as high cost. So can we start looking at facility reuse and thinking about housing and on those sites to serve our communities to decrease cost or to reduce some of those needs? So I think cities will have to start thinking about that uniquely and in ways that we haven't to create it, to meet our RENA goals. Everybody on this call should probably know about those, which are coming down from the state. So we are in a very unique situation. We have to continue our path forward with creating the best learning environments for our students, but also maintaining and understanding that COVID now changes what the learning environment will look like for the foreseeable future.
Mark, I was just going to chime in and also share that that point that Kadarius made is it's a much more sustainable way of building as well. And currently Los Angeles is undergoing a recode effort of rewriting our zoning code to be more form-based, not totally form-based, but much more form-based code. And a lot of our regulations are being considered to make sure that we're allowing development to not have to demolish in order to reuse. And for that exact reason, as it's a much more sustainable, it brings down the cost of construction, and then it makes communities much more affordable. So we are totally looking to do that as well.
And just a follow-up, Kadarius, you mentioned that you're seeing a dip in the number of school-age children, at least that's what you're forecasting. So the idea is you're probably not going to have to hire more teachers, but can you imagine a world where we still have to use some semblance of social distancing? So do you anticipate maybe needing to hire more teachers aides, more school nurses, just the number of people that are employed by the school district, or is that still an unknown?
What I think a number of districts are experiencing is that I think 1/4 of the nation's population of teachers are over the age of 50. And so what a number of districts just across, just kind of tracking this with some of our professional groups, is that the districts are seeing teachers retire. And so you're seeing this exodus of teachers who are high risk. And so there is space for new teachers. So I don't foresee districts doing a hiring freeze unless budgets are impacted by state funding moving forward, which they might be. I'm sure they will be. And if so, I don't see us ensuring that we will continue to hire. I don't foresee us scaling back on our teacher staff. Our nurses will always need them, and I think at the same rate, unless with this boom we have to start pushing people out. But it will kind of be done so gradually that it won't disrupt the learning environment or impact student success.
That's great to know. So I want to ask each one of you one more question, and then we'll hand it back over to Christine and answer some questions from our viewers. So obviously, we can't really talk about COVID-19, and we've talked about disparity among communities of color. We've talked about systemic racism on some level. Can you just each address as best you're comfortable how your organization or your municipality has started discussing systemic racism I know Los Angeles and Oakland have a long history from the Great Migration to disparities between whites and people of color. I don't know the story in Orange County as well, but if you each could kind of just discuss that, and then we'll hand it over to Christine. Whoever wants to go first.
I feel like we should start with Orange County because I'm I'm sorry that I'm laughing, but
I was
I'd
gonna
love
hold
to hear your
off
take.
because I wanted it to be a great surprise because everyone talks about Oakland and LA. As I said at the top of the call, I also sit on the planning commission for the city of Costa Mesa. So being one of the only African Americans on the planning commission in a city with less than 1% um, uh, of African Americans, I have had a very unique experience, I will say. So what I guess we have kind of talked about, but in the midst of all of these things that we were experiencing with COVID-19, there was Black Lives Matter protests and riots or uprisings taking place throughout the country, and that specifically impacted all of our communities. So, you know, thinking about from this as a planner and from the planning perspective, what could we do to begin to interrogate not only our history in this city, but also our planning code, our zoning codes, and how we operationalize those documents to our predominantly brown community that does not have or did not for a long period of time have council representation in these districts just due to how districts were zoned or gerrymandered in a sense to prevent that representation or voice from being heard. And so what we are experiencing is we have a predominantly single family community that is not open to multifamily development and is not responding to the state's RENA allocations in terms of, or respects to how we design or begin to rethink some of our industrial zones or zones that are underutilized land. So our planning commission about 2 weeks ago, what we did was we adopted or asked our commission, our council to adopt the start of a human relations and equity committee, which will review every aspect of the city for bias and thinking about how people experience bias, be it bias, be it from the police department and where high traffic stops or where our police department spend the most time, and kind of understanding that to our hiring practices, to understanding our zoning code and fees, which may create barriers for certain populations to pay, to bring things to the planning commission or protest different developments that impact them disproportionately. So we are doing a lot, and we're thinking about this in ways, and we've had conversations that we've never had. And so I think I bring a certain perspective. We have 2 women on the commission that bring a very strong perspective of inequity issues. I think we're thinking about gender neutral language. This extends beyond race and really thinking about how we update and modernize our codes that are antiquated and bring them to the 20th century. And we just haven't done that in any way. So a lot of our communities just don't speak to gender neutrality, or they're very male-based. Our language also always called our development director a he as opposed to a she. Just things like that, just little nuances that just need to be updated. We're just doing a very holistic look at that, and I'm awaiting our council's decision to see how we proceed. So that's Orange County.
Sorry, I put you on the spot. I was just I've been to Orange County quite a bit in my life, so I was just curious as to your take. I'll speak a little bit about Oakland, as well as just professionally. I work in a company that works nationally and internationally, and we, have been pushing equity in different projects for a long time. I think a lot of my business line in particular is just focused on equity outcomes. However, we have also sort of heightened that conversation at the corporate level in terms of, what is the internal work that we need to do in order to authentically represent these outcomes externally for our clients. So as awful as these situations are, and as shameful as it is that this is what it took for us all as a nation to really have this conversation, I think that it's kind of exciting that we are, as difficult as it is. The city of Oakland, as you know, and you know, again, I'm on the planning commission. I don't work for the city, so I can't claim to have, you know, speared any of this or led any of this. It's not, I don't claim it. But the city of Oakland has been working on this for quite a long time. We established a Department of Race and Equity about 4 or 5 years ago. We actually stole the lead from Seattle's Department of Race and Equity, which was the first place in the country to establish that department. And so a lot of especially the transportation decisions and different things that go to council are run through that department. And we've already seen some really great impacts of that. Our bike plan, which was just redone about a year ago, is really revolutionary. And the reason is because rather than going into communities and saying, hey, we want to put bike lanes here, we worked with community-based organizations, with advocacy groups, with leaders in the community, and actually went to the community and said, what do you need? And learned that actually they need access to bikes. Actually, there's no, you know, Black and brown owned bike shops. Actually, the police stop Black people on bikes a lot more than anyone else. In fact, we've done quite a bit of research and have pretty strong data on the enforcement side of both traffic and vehicle and pedestrian stops by the Oakland Police Department. So I think we talk a lot as planners about data and how important data is, and I agree it's very important, but data is a tool and it can tell you whatever you want it to tell you. So we really need to focus on what we're trying to achieve. And if we're trying to achieve a more equitable future, we need to be very honest about the past we've had and the way that we've gotten here, and then focus on addressing those priorities first. I think, you know, when you work in planning, it's really difficult because even having a meeting, whether it's in person or online, and talking about a project requires that the people that come to speak on it have access to resources. They have access to the resource of time, of information, of childcare and transportation, and you know, and so you usually only hear kind of one side of something. And I think that we really need to be very specific and focused on addressing those kinds of gaps, addressing our historically racist zoning practices, you know, addressing redlining, and not just saying, well, that was in the past and let's move forward. We can't move forward without examining our past. And I'm pretty proud of what Oakland's done. I think one of the really key pieces of it is being authentic in that we are going to mess up. Like this is, you know, we should have done this a long time ago, but we're trying it now, and we'll see what works, and some things won't work, and we need to learn from that. We can't be afraid to get it wrong, you know. So yeah, that's it.
Hi, in Los Angeles, we actually, our department, it was a staff-led effort to create an equity statement, which we have on our website, and it's pretty great because I feel like from an agency of our size, it's a rare moment that we took such a strong stand, and we acknowledge our past quite a bit in the statement of our wrongdoings, and we own it. And so I think that's pretty rad because it happened while I was part of this department, and I'm really grateful that I'm part of this department in this moment. Our mayor has established a new executive directive where each department has to appoint a chief equity officer. So now we have a chief equity officer for each of our departments, which is pretty awesome as well. And they have a committee of staff, or I guess they have staff that help them. And we're developing a report on all of the areas that everyone's mentioned about our practices that have been institutionally racist, and how and develop an action plan on where we can improve them. We also are, you know, I mentioned we're redoing our zoning code, and we're very much looking at it with the lens of equity among sustainability. We're not lowering the expectation of achieving that across the board. All of our outreach efforts are very much focused on being accessible in the digital divide as well. Thinking about how we can do text SMS outreach to make sure that we're not leaving people out when we do outreach. These are all, it's you know, they've all been things that we've talked about in the past in, you know, smaller groups of staff circles. Our department is about 450 people, so things float up and then they float away sometimes, but now it's really the opportunity to circle back on these ideas and these efforts that really create equity and how we not just operate, but also get advice and embrace our community, and being sure that when we do finally tap into these voices that haven't been historically heard, that their voice is considered as equal to the voices that we always hear. And that's a really big priority that we are taking seriously. And also just the way that staff have been treated in the past. That's also we're also looking at the internal lens. So, you know, it is, you know, tragic that we are here right now, but it's also fantastic that that it's forced us to take this so seriously, and it's giving us this opportunity to really, really make improvements.
Thank you both so very much. And with that, I'll hand it over to Christine. I think you have some questions from our audience.
Yes, and if you could flip, if you wouldn't mind, Mark, to your next slide with contact info, if you have that. Folks are asking for that. And perfect, thank you. And if you do have questions, you can just type those in the chat box in your GoToWebinar tool panel, and we'll see what we can get to. Okay, the first question, and maybe we'll just start with Sahar because she's the first person I see on my little block here. What are your observations about virtual public meetings and public hearings versus in person relative to participation and deliberation? So what are the differences, if any, that you've experienced, and what are your thoughts on those differences?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think I'll just preface by saying, you know, I'm also an ELL. I was an ELL student. I come from an immigrant family, and so that digital divide is very real to me. And it's not just access; it's also about how we use technology. You know, I always talk about how my parents have like 12 cell phones. They always have like the brand new model for no reason whatsoever, but but they would never use it that way. They would never get on a Zoom call, and so I think we really have to think about all of the different issues that people have in terms of accessing and using technology, because there's cultural issues as well. I will say, that being said, we are seeing a lot more participation in our meetings. I think that what we're removing is the factor of time, the factor of travel, and then the factor of, you know, potentially, possibly childcare, because if you're just waiting to speak for 2 minutes at a 5-hour meeting, you maybe don't need to get a babysitter for your kid to come to the full meeting. So there's a potential benefit to it, but I do think that the digital divide portion is really essential and important, and I don't think we've solved that problem yet. In terms of the back and forth and the deliberation, I'd say that, you know, and I think this professionally as well, one of the kind of beauties of this time is that we're all normalizing normalcy, where we're getting used to the fact that we're all human. And, you know, when we're all on a call together and we can't see each other's faces and everyone has something to say, we might talk over each other. Someone might accidentally be muted. Someone's kid might come into the picture. And I actually think that's wonderful. I think it's really great that we're, you know, in a sense, hard that we're blurring the lines between our normal and professional lives, but really great that we're seeing each other as human beings. And I think that's actually shifting the dialogue in this interesting way as well. But I think the main issue is going to continue to be how we address that digital divide, because again, we're seeing more participation, but I think there's an increasing split in who is participating, and we need to figure that out, and we haven't yet.
Would anyone else like to comment? Gabriella?
We've been doing, we've been trying to do outreach, and, you know, we've seen in the last 3 big outreach efforts that we've done kind of a webinar style, but it's like the beginning is live, and then we record the presentation and play the video, and then we do a live Q&A. We are also getting a lot of people that have never been part of the process before, which is fantastic. And you know, we're getting voices that haven't had time to be part of the process. But what we are really sad to learn is that our Latino people are not participating at all in high numbers, and it's definitely a big showing that we had an outreach event. It was a series of 3 or 4 different meetings that we had and webinar times basically, and we had about 300 to 400 in each, but then we only had about 25 in the Spanish speaking version. So we had one that was just in Spanish, and so it in the city of Los Angeles, that's really sad. And so we really need to work on how we do outreach to monolingual, non-English speakers, and not just on a virtual, like a camera video way. So, if anyone out there has suggestions, I'm all ears.
I was going to say that we've seen an increased participation from our planning commission as well. The way in which I think to Sahar and most Gabrielle's point, we have, changed the travel time has shifted for our participants, and also our staff, I think, have just been able to work in a way, like in a I don't know if it's more comfortable for them, but it just seems to be more accessible, and there seems to be more humanity to people. People are more understanding and thinking about developments in new ways. We've had some really big cases come before the commission during COVID, primarily related to housing access. And so I think in the midst of the Black Lives Matter movement and people having new conversations, people are really thinking about what those, whereas people will probably push back against a major housing development, people are thinking, well, who's going to live there? What does access looks like? And our housing element that we're updating to ensure that it is a more inclusive of people from class to address travel and other economic challenges that people face. So we're definitely seeing that improvement. Like in those conversations, you see new voices, you hear new faces. They're young, they're old. It's really exciting to see. Because people are learning so much about the Planning Commission that somehow didn't exist before March. So they're definitely dialed in, they're clued in, and then with this being an election year, in November, people are definitely, decisions that are being made now they're highly visible because people have time. And I think for school boards, which don't have high participation, typically, they're definitely going to have higher participation. And people are watching school board meetings more than ever because they're concerned about what's happening to their kids. So those meetings are lined up, they're full, and the engagement is over the top, and people are like, I didn't know who represented my district for school board, but now I do, and I have so many questions for this person. So, and the value that they think about my child's life. So things are changing.
Okay, next question. Do you envision, and the answer is yes. I'm already answering it for all of you. We can go into detail. Do you envision a stronger role for planners going forward in the realm of public health? Let's talk about that. Does anyone want to start?
I'll just jump in. Absolutely, and I think actually this entire panel probably is great to talk about this because California has been pushing that for quite some time at the state level, and then trying to push it out at the local level. And Oakland did a health impact assessment when we were first doing our planning or revising our plans a few years ago, which really, sorry, for the Department of Transportation, not our housing plans or anything like that, but it really was helpful because again, going back to the data piece, it's very hard to argue with, we're focusing our infrastructure investments in this community because children here have a higher mortality rate. you know, that goes a long way against the my street has potholes argument. So I think that there's both the benefit of understanding how transportation and land use and housing and environment affects our public health, which I think just needs to be a bigger conversation amongst planners and quite honestly amongst everyone. But also there's some value in having that data to help make those decisions and help get buy-in for those decisions. So absolutely, I think we're already moving in that direction. And COVID will obviously just make that stronger.
I think too, Sahar, we can thank you for adding to the general plan requirements environmental justice as something that we need to include, which, you know, when I saw that OPR put that on us, I was like beyond excited, and we all were, because we've ignored it forever. And, you know, I think that this is one of the best things that a planner could do, is be environmentally justice minded and, you know, force a regulation to make us do it.
I just have to say that, you know, that was it's a very complicated process, because the definition of environmental justice and community health and social equity were all kind of intertangled, and some of them were required and some of them weren't. But I do have to give credit to Dr. Elizabeth Baca for that one, because she really dug into that really deep. So.
Darius, do you have any other comments? These ladies kind of said it well, didn't they? Next question, timely. How would any of you reach out to hard to count populations to enhance our 2020 census numbers, particularly with the fine combination of COVID and social unrest? What have your communities done to try to increase the numbers participating?
In Los Angeles, I think we've put announcements in every kind of city generated bill, like utility bill, and we also do our best to remind everyone when we're doing any kind of outreach that they, you know, to complete the census. But I'm personally very worried for all these poor census workers that have to go door to door.
Yeah, I think one of the, I mean, this is a larger question. I think the census is obviously particularly significant. However, I think there's a larger question of doing engagement and reaching people in this complicated time. And you know, again, professionally, we do a lot of that type of work, thinking about projects and planning. And we've started sort of shifting, in addition to online, thinking about, you know, going back to some mailers. Calling people on the phone. Remember phone calls, guys? We've worked very closely with a lot of CBOs locally in the community, faith leaders, places where people already go, like grocery stores, working with essential businesses to ensure that there's information available in multiple languages, addressing multiple things. So really taking that concept of meeting people where they're at and sort of just updating it for the strange new time that we're in, and pushing really hard on it, because I think to Gabriella's point, there's just the divide's gonna get bigger, and we don't want to physically impact people while we're trying to close it. So I think there's more to be done, but we're just trying to push in every way that we can at the moment.
I think what, for Santa Ana specifically, what has been done is they started a major marketing called Santa Ana Counts. And I think there has to be a lot of education specifically for this community, and thinking about what the census means for them, what understanding immigrant status and what could happen as a form of, like, is there any, should I be afraid for letting people know how many families are here in my household? And so the fear is in hard to count zones, that's been like ramped up engagement, and specifically in targeting those families to ensure that they aren't afraid of filling out the census, and that knowing that filling out the census will provide more funding for our students and our communities to ensure that we're providing more resourcing to those needs in those areas, and that not responding does a disservice to the community. So I think really educating people, I think some of the federal tactics and language changes recently to the census has contributed to people being afraid, especially under a particular administration and the language that they're using that's not encouraging in school, and the way that they've changed could potentially impact COVID and just census outcomes in unprecedented ways.
I would be remiss if I didn't actually mention that the divisions, I've spearheaded the day of service. Last year was the first one, and I think Mark got to see the mural that we created in the Fruitvale TOD. And this year, we were going to do it in Houston. We are still going to do it in Houston. It just won't be me, but we're going to do a mural for the census and on one of the underpasses of the I-95, and it's a safe routes to school where a lot of the children have to pass. And we're also doing a community garden beautification project in that same route. But it's to be counted. So we're trying to encourage, especially Latinos who, we just got threatened again that we shouldn't be counted. Yesterday was it? So we're trying to make it a positive and explain the value of being counted makes us as planners have better resources.
Okay, I think based on time, we're gonna wrap up. This has been great. I love this discussion. There's still quite a few questions. So folks, if your question wasn't answered, just feel free to reach out to one of our panelists who can get back to you with that. So thank you to the National Capital Area and to the California chapters for pulling this together and hosting this session today. And of course, our speakers, Gabriella, Kadarius, Sahar, and our moderator, Mark, thank you for joining us. The session has been recorded. We'll post it on our YouTube channel. Just search Planning Webcast on YouTube and you'll find it. So everyone have a great weekend, stay safe, and we'll talk next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.